Hello, and welcome to the Wisconsin Chiropractic Association podcast, Back to Basics, the show where knowledge comes to life. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Resch, president of the Wisconsin Chiropractic Association, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for another enlightening episode. In each episode, we will be bringing some of the brightest minds, visionaries, and experts from various fields of healthcare, business, politics, and of course, chiropractic. We'll engage in a thought-provoking conversation with today's guest to provide basic information to provide you, our listeners, with an opportunity to gain valuable knowledge and wisdom that can positively impact your life. Today I'll be having a conversation with Dr. Steve Yeomans, chiropractor from Ripon, Wisconsin. Dr. Yeomans is a 1979 summa cum laude graduate of National College of Chiropractic, now known as National Health Science University. He's going to tell us all about what inspired him to become a chiropractor, what it was like to be a third-generation chiropractor, how he built and maintains a fantastic relationship with the medical community in his area, his communication style with patients, what tools are in his clinical toolbox when it comes to chiropractic care, his vast history of his research, his publications, his textbook, and his teachings. And in the end, Dr. Yeomans gives us the insight on what it takes just to get better. With that, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Steve Yeomans. Hello, Dr. Steve Yeomans. How are you today?
I am very well, Dr. Resch. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. All right, I'm going to go Steve from here on out, if you're good with that.
I'm good with that, Chris.
Right, fantastic. Well, here we go. When we talk about inspiration and mentors, you're the guy, Steve. And I hear it all over the state. Whenever we have an awards banquet, your name always comes up about who inspired you in chiropractic. So now I'm talking to the guy who inspired, so many chiropractors in the state of Wisconsin. So I'm just going to get down to it. What inspired you to become a chiropractor?
Well, the biggest inspiration was growing up in a chiropractic family. My grandfather was a chiropractor, and kind of an interesting story. He was a cook in northern Minnesota and hurt himself and went to a chiropractor, and the chiropractor was intrigued with my granddad, George, and said, George, you'd make a great chiropractor. And George thought about it and packed up his family and went down to Chicago. And during his tenure at National College in Chicago, my father was conceived at his mom's, my grandma Minnie's, age 45, and this is 1924. This was probably not a planned pregnancy, but lucky for me, my father was conceived. And so my dad graduated from Ashland, Wisconsin in high school and went to World War II, and then graduated from National in 1950. And I was born in 55 and lost both granddads in 54, so I never got to meet my chiropractic grandfather, George. But even when I started practicing with my dad in 79, there were quite a few patients that had stories about my granddad, and they were very colorful and positive and fun. But my dad obviously gave my brother and I adjustments through our life, and we saw the lifestyle that we had, and it was very positive and comfortable. He was well respected, and he was definitely my inspiration. But I really didn't get much of a drive to be a chiropractor until he started teaching me how to treat him, and that came out of wrestling and messing around and having fun with my dad. And he would typically win and then would let me win. And on one occasion around age 14, I let him have it. And he didn't get up, and he said, "Well, Steve, it's time you fix me now." And he told me what to pull and push and what to do. And he stood up and said, "Okay, I think I feel better now, thanks." And So from age 14 on, I kept asking him, bugging him, show me some more tricks, some chiropractic techniques that I can practice on my buddies. So my football buddies and basketball buddies, and not so much on my golf team, but football and basketball, everybody lined up after practices for adjustments, and they couldn't wait to let me get my hands on them. Back in those days, there wasn't liability. Kind of a funny story. I was teaching my grandson how to do a few things, and I told him what I did. So he started lining his football buddies up, and quickly the coaches ran and said, "Sam, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm just trying some things that my grandfather taught me how to do." And they said, "You can't do that. There's liability issues and all these different problems." But put a kind of stifled that process.
So you're 14 years old at the time, but you obviously had been getting adjusted from either your dad or your grandfather prior to that. But kind of 14 was the age where you were like, huh, I think I want to keep doing this.
Yeah, I maybe made a mental commitment right around age 16, so that
Okay.
I knew I had to stay reasonably focused in
Yeah.
school. I was probably up until my sophomore year in high school a pretty average student, and then about age 16, I thought, you know what, I better learn how to study. I better put some effort into this. And from that point forward, academics improved significantly. And
That's interesting. I have a similar story, but mine came a couple years later because I was going to follow in my dad's footprints and be an accountant all the way up until my senior year. And truth be told, I'd be the world's worst accountant today. So it was a good thing that I didn't choose that path. But I had a chiropractic scenario when I was a senior that opened up my eyes to chiropractic. So senior year in high school, that's when I decided that, maybe I should start paying a little bit more attention to biology and, chemistry's a little bit too late. I already missed that opportunity, but yeah, so you had that little head start. So rolling around Ripon High School back in the day, you were the high school team chiropractor when you were in sports.
I,
So sounds like you're an athlete. Tell me a little bit about that.
so I played football, basketball, and track up until my senior, or in high school. I started on the golf team. I started golfing around age 10, and that was probably much more successful than my track career. Golf was by far more successful.
Which I understand you're a pretty darn good golfer yet today. So,
Well,
so
it's what they say, a work in progress, right?
there you go. So off to undergrad. Where was undergrad for you?
I went to North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, and it was a great experience. And played football my freshman year, and learned the politics of sports, and decided that I didn't need that my second year, and played intramural football and basketball. And I was on the golf team both years that I went to North Central. I got accepted to chiropractic college after my sophomore year. Back in those days, you could get into chiropractic college after 2 years and then finish your Bachelor of Science degree at the College of Chiropractic. They had undergraduate programs available for those of us that were 2-year students. So I finished that 2 years later while I was learning the ins and outs of chiropractic at National College of Chiropractic from 75 through 79, and got my degree in 79, and couldn't wait to join my dad. I couldn't wait to leave Ripon and get out of a small town as a high school kid. And after the 6 years in the greater Chicago land area, realized what a gem Ripon, Wisconsin is. And my mentor, of course, being dad, got me back. So
Yeah, I think when we leave the nest after high school, we have all these aspirations of whether it's bigger city or different geographical area of the country, and then something happens where you just decide that I think I just want to go back home. And that's what you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, that's what I did.
So your
Yeah,
practice, I believe you're on Eureka Street. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Is that homestead for your grandfather's practice and your father's practice, or did that change?
Well, Granddad moved from his practice was initially in Superior, Wisconsin, and he graduated in 26. And in 1926, he joined a medical doctor in practice in Superior and worked there during the Depression. And he had my dad and his four siblings somehow or another. And I don't know how Grandpa ended up in Ripon, but my dad, I recall saying he just thought it was an interesting central Wisconsin place, small liberal art college in Ripon, small community, no chiropractors. I think I'll move there, kind of thing. So he rented a spot on Main Street and had a successful practice. And Dad joined him in 1950, and Grandpa had a bad heart and didn't make it, but maybe 4 more years. Died in 54, and handed my dad the keys literally when he joined him. And he had worked for his father before going to chiropractic college. And in fact, Dad was inspired to be an optometrist initially, and decided after working with his dad that, boy, this is very interesting. I think I'll do this instead. So went into chiropractic and built a new office off of Main Street in 63 on Eureka Street that I joined him in. So that was in 64. And then I joined him in 79. And then I bought not an old, but a restaurant. It was basically a big butler building, 14,000 square feet. So we went from a 1,400, 1,700 square foot ranch to this 7,200 square foot, 2-level big building that I had to make look professional. So I had the outside cladded in cedar at different angles and colors and made it a professional building, and had a much bigger parking lot. Our parking lot at 315 was terrible. People would have to double park and block people in, and my dad and I were bumping into each other constantly. But then we moved into a space that had tons of room. In 1990, it was finished. So I was in his old location for about 10 years, and then he joined me for a couple of years and then retired in 92 at age 67, practicing for 42 years. So he and my mom would take extended vacations and enjoy themselves in the wintertime.
Gotcha.
The last 10 years of his practice. So yeah, everything worked out great.
So your grandfather graduates in the 20s, works with a medical doctor back then, when other chiropractors might even be going to jail for practicing medicine without a license.
That's very true. Yeah. Yeah.
Did your grandfather ever run up against that?
No, from what I understood, because even penicillin wasn't founded until the late 30s, there were many natural remedies that medical doctors used, and he saw my grandfather as an asset, and they shared patient populations, and everybody got along because there were no turf wars at the time between professions, or at least this particular medical doctor was open-minded. And there were no stories that I recall my dad talking about that his father mentioned about pros or cons of working with a medical doc. But I always thought it was interesting, especially during the Depression when nobody could pay. They'd bring in a chicken for a gesture of kindness, and that was welcome because it was food on the table.
Wow.
But it was a different time.
Okay. And then your dad graduates in the 50s, and then he turns into a businessman where he, looks for a place to practice in Ripon and, grabs a building, starts a practice, and then you come along in 1979 and join him. And sounds like you work together until the early 90s when he retires. And now you're Steve Yeomans, chiropractor, business person. And tell me a little bit about the techniques or the philosophy that you grabbed on with chiropractic early on. I'm sure you were inspired again by your grandfather and your father as far as adjustment styles, techniques, that type of thing. Where does that take us?
Well, throughout my tenure at National College of Chiropractic, now it's National University of Health Sciences. Most of the chiropractic colleges changed their names for getting funding and federal funding and different reasons for changing names. But it was a great experience. I couldn't get enough of anatomy, physiology, and all those things. And one of my best pals at National was an ex-pro hockey player out of Toronto region, and he paid his way through National teaching kids how to play hockey. So he was teaching the peewees how to play hockey, and one of the peewees' fathers worked in the orthopedic department at Cook County Hospital and invited my friend Mark to come down and sit in and observe surgery or learn, whatever there was to learn. He wasn't exactly sure what he would be doing, but he certainly didn't want to do it alone. So he said, "I'll do it if you'll do it." And I looked at him and drooling, said, "Oh, absolutely. This is what an opportunity." So he set up this father of this peewee hockey kid, set up a meeting with Dr. Pankovich, who was the head of the orthopedic department at Cook County Hospital. And so Mark and I went there and just said we're chiropractic students, and we were invited by the father of the hockey player to come and observe. What do you think? Yeah, and so the orthopedist kind of said, "So let me get this straight. A couple of chiropractors want to come here and watch us do surgery." And then he paused and looked at us and said, "Well, what if we have a bad day and the person doesn't make it? Are you ever going to refer a patient to us?" And we looked at each other, certainly not expecting that kind of reply, and didn't have a whole lot to say. He said, "I think it would be far more advantageous if you guys would just do a rotation, like our medical students. You'd be essentially doing a rotation with our med students for 6 weeks in the orthopedic department." And the spine facility shared the foot. So we were on the foot and back service for 6 weeks in May of 1975. And that was just phenomenal in terms of learning how to cooperate, interdisciplinary trading of techniques, and what do you do for this condition. And the two residents that we were assigned to were fabulous and gave us rein to do whatever we could for the open clinics, which were twice a week. And most of these were welfare patients, many of them street people. And so on the foot and back service in May, we're coming out of a winter, and we saw a lot of amputations of lower limbs because of frostbitten toes and feet and diabetic issues and a lot of illness that I wouldn't normally see. We were part of the surgical scrub team, and I became the official photographer for our senior resident because I enjoyed photography, and he wanted his lens in every cavity that he surgery in. And so it was just phenomenal. And we were treating the attending physicians' families by we had to present cases to the attendings and to the residents and to the students. Not we, but the residents did. And before we got there, there was a postpartum subluxated sacrum, which means a sacrum that gets locked up during birth. And if you touched her bed, she would scream, and they thought she was psychogenically impaired, but she was pretty normal before the delivery. So the two residents, not knowing what to do, and we weren't there yet, so they anesthetized her and then watched a video of spinal manipulation, whether it was chiropractic or I'm not sure, but when she came out of anesthesia, she could not only stand the bed being bumped, but she could raise her legs, she could ambulate, she could do, it was miraculous. So they presented this case the first week we were there, and normally cases would take about 15 minutes and the attendings would drill the residents and make them, squirm and so forth. And they were getting nowhere with these residents because the residents had no answers. They took x-rays pre and post of the SI joints. Nothing looked different. They couldn't do a clinical exam on her because she was so painful. And there was this miraculous outcome from a technique that's not normally done by orthopods. So they turned to us and said, well, we happen to have two chiropractors in the room that maybe they can explain what the heck happened. And my partner said, I'm not going up there. So I couldn't wait. And I sprinted up to the podium, and about 45 minutes later, I was demonstrating an adjustment on an attending physician that volunteered. And from that point on, we were just given a red carpet to do whatever we felt was appropriate. And we were fed all kinds of interesting cases, and many of them were successful outcomes and opened their eyes. And some of them were well beyond the scope of chiropractic. And we said, I don't think I want to treat that gangrenous foot, but I'll take that rotator cuff over there, and I'll take that sprained knee, or of course, anything spinal, neck, mid-back, low back. And it was great.
Wow. So that story actually opens up so many different topics. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I don't want to leave anything out either. But I do want to talk about somewhere along the line, you became inspired to teach. And before we get into that, what you said was you ran up to the podium and you spoke for 45 minutes, obviously in front of medical doctors and everyone else in the room. So that teaching bug must have been in you. You also mentioned about the locked up pelvis. And I've been in your classes many times. I know you talk about and speak to what actually happens during the adjustment. And there's different philosophies. I've been taught the whole line analysis philosophy and alignment, and still to some degree taught today. And then there's mobilization and inducing motion in the joint. And of course, you've studied under some of the greats, Vladimir Yanda. We'll speak to that as well. But first, let's talk about what in your mind happens during the adjustment, mobilization, alignment, and take it from there, Steve.
Well, I think first is align patient fears. So patients present to us not knowing what's wrong with them, and they're anxious, their blood pressure is up, they hurt like heck, they wonder if they're going to end up surgical. And so we do our exam, history exam, and we put their mind at ease to put things into a proper perspective. And I think that's a huge part of what we do. We don't sit behind a desk. We put our hands on people and we have them do what they can do. in their acute stage if they present that way, and ally their fears, and then tell them what we feel is wrong with them. So my goal in that initial visit is to basically get them calmed down and bring them up to a realistic viewpoint of what they have. So, for example, low back pain. If they've had it for the last, off and on for the last 10, 15, 20 years, I tell them, I am going to help you self-manage. My goal is to get rid of pain. That's what got you here. To help improve your posture, to minimize the stresses on your spine. And that's a combination of me teaching you exercise and through some passive manual therapies, but most of it's going to be teaching. It may include a shim and a shoe if they have an anatomical short leg. It may include orthotics if their ankles are pronating and they're knock-kneed and their hips are variously angulated and their pelvis has an unstable foundation. And then the third goal, of course, is prevention and how they can self-manage and then use me as needed. Those are, I call it 3 Ps: pain, posture, prevention. And I tell the patient, you're the consumer, you're here in pain. I'm going to get you out of pain the best I can. And that sometimes requires co-management with allied healthcare providers. Sometimes a Medrol dose pack, is appropriate to get rid of the cytokine storm, the inflammatory burst that happens. If I recommend that through their primary care physician 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year, that's maybe a lot. It's hardly ever needed, but I have built up and worked hard at building up a relationship with our local medical docs and osteopaths and physical therapists, and we're all part of a team. I don't think we're against each other. I don't believe that they want to do what I do. In fact, I know they don't. I've lectured in physical therapy settings, and by the time I'm done, I think they realize that there's a whole lot more to manual therapies than an occasional adjustment. So what do we do as chiropractors? So, we do a thrust manipulation that creates a joint cavitation, which the latest research suggests a bubble is being formed as the joint separates. And that formation of the bubble creates the sound. That's the latest research. And that's probably within the last couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 at the most. Prior to that, no, it was the bubble bursting and nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide belching out of a joint, making sound. And that was my dissertation to patients of what the crack sound is when joints make noise. And once you make the crack, you got to wait about 30 minutes because you can't get the gas to release until it reforms. And that made a lot of sense to me. But the initial studies go back to 1942 when Ralston and company took an index finger under an x-ray and stretched it until it popped, and then measured the joint space moving from 2.1 millimeters to 4.4 millimeters, and then over the next half hour gradually going back to 2.1. And they came up with the gas being emitted, and most diarthrodial moving synovial joints are under a hydrostatic negative pressure, so it makes sense that there'd be a popping sound in a negative pressured compartment. Research has now brought it to the point where that's what the crack is. Take the crack away. So what does it do to us? It restores mobility to the joint. There's no question about that. In fact, I was part of a study that I presented in China in 1987, which was one of my first, actually my second lecture. My first lecture was in Paris, France. That was in 1984. And the faculty included myself, the college president of National, Dr. Joseph Jancy, and Carl Cleveland III. We were the U.S. representatives with some foreign faculty. And that was another great experience that got me into teaching. But Jancy kind of gave me a deal I couldn't refuse in terms of, he expected me to continue teaching. But we know we restore motion. We know we stimulate nerve endings that communicate with larger nerve bundles. And we know those larger nerve bundles communicate with the central nervous system. And so there's local effects, there's central nervous system effects, there's vascular circulatory effects, there's benefits to the myology, the soft tissues. Every tissue, that's the premise of massage therapy is, attacking maladies through the muscular system. Chiropractors embrace the neuromusculoskeletal system, and that was, how we were founded. And it's amazing the research that can be done now with functional MRI showing brain areas lighting up when things are done manually to the periphery. So there's all kinds of central nervous system benefits to manual therapy done to an extremity, to the spine, to the upper cervical region. As you know, in our profession, there's a group of chiropractors that only treat the upper cervicals, and they only treat C1, the atlas. And that was a division point in chiropractic years ago, and maybe still is. I don't look at it as a division point. I look at it as another way to affect our neuromusculoskeletal system. And I've seen very good things happen when Atlas only is adjusted. So, and I've also seen miraculous things when I was in China. And the more I've learned, I think the less I know about this wonderful body of ours.
Hello, everyone. I want to tell you a little bit about our upcoming 2024 Wisconsin Chiropractic Association Spring Convention. It's going to be held April 11th through the 14th at the stunning Osthoff Resort in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in practice, the Spring Convention is the place to be. Join us for a unique opportunity to earn CE credits while enjoying the beautiful surroundings of Elkhart Lake. We will have informative sessions by industry experts. The vendor area will provide an opportunity for you to explore a variety of products and services from leading companies. And as you know, the in-person experience of the WCA conventions always provides the opportunity to connect with colleagues from across the state. So mark your calendars for April 11th through the 14th, 2024, and join us at the WCA Spring Convention at the Osthoff Resort in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. Registration will be open mid-January of 2024, so again, just a heads up to save the date, April 11th through the 14th. We can't wait to see you there. All that knowledge you have, what it came down to is mobility and function, but there's so much more to it. And you've written numerous papers that have been published. You've got your textbook, Clinical Application of Outcome Assessment. Then somewhere along the line, you became inspired to teach and continue to grab further knowledge. So it sounds like you started teaching back in your 20s, if it was mid 80s, and you graduated in 79. And then you also traveled abroad and studied under Dr. Yanda. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I actually started teaching when I was at National.
Did you really?
In the anatomy lab, and we had clubs for sacrooccipital technique, SOT, for applied kinesiology, AK. And my goal when I graduated was to learn as much as I could to facilitate my dad's practice. So,
You already knew how to adjust before you got to chiropractic college, so why not just jump right into teaching, right?
well, it was the club scenario was a, a definite in, because I was interested and had the knowledge to get a group of people together, and I formed the SOT club at National, and all these bits and pieces. I just loved teaching because you have to really know the subject to teach it. And it forced me to dive into things and self-study in a way that I would have not ever done had I not taught. So,
That's an interesting concept. I just want to just kind of just pause there for a second before you go on, and just people realize that if they're going to teach this, they really need to know this. So yes, it does force that deeper dive into learning.
it definitely does. You can't pull the wool over the eyes of everyone, and it's the few in the class that are sharp as a tack that you want to inspire, and they'll take you to task. I mean, I love teaching because and I tell every class at the beginning of the class, I'm here to learn just like you are. So collectively, we've got 30, 50, 100, 200, whatever the number of chiropractors in a room. Let's trade our secrets. Let's learn from each other. And I have a piece of paper that I scribble stuff down, or I'll ask somebody in the front row, could you just write that down for me and give it to me later so that I can follow up on it. And it's just a wonderful, trading experience. But the 1995 trip to Prague to study with Vladimir Yanda and Carol Levitt came about. I had an associate at the time, Dr. Alicia Evans, who practices in the greater Milwaukee area, and she turned me on to this group of LACC rehab guys, Craig Levinson, and this group of folks that were doing very cool things with rehabilitation. And I was very interested in outcomes assessments, not just paper and pen, patient telling me on a 0 to 10 scale what their pain or disability scores are, but more importantly, functional outcomes. So I had developed a small battery of tests using the American College of Sports Medicine booklet, the 1 minute sit-up test, maximum push-up test, the near reach box, the 3-minute step test. And it told me more about function and didn't focus so much on subjective symptoms. And so I used that in the 80s, and then in the early 90s when Alicia turned me on to these guys and we attended a class in Chicago, and Craig Levinson was, by this time I was teaching for National College of Chiropractic in the orthopedic program. Chiropractors can specialize in various things, and I specialized in orthopedics and got board certified in 85, and that was about I'd started taking classes actually before I graduated. And I could have stayed at school for 2 years and done an internship. And part of me regrets not doing that because it's total immersion. But I decided to do a 5-year residency in practice and got my board certification in 85. And so I was teaching impairment rating for the orthopedic group in 87 on. And so Craig was using an inclinometer and measuring spinal range of motion and clearly not doing it correctly, because this is part of what I do in the course that I was teaching. And so at a break, I pulled him aside. I said, Craig, you're holding the inclinometer in the wrong plane when you're testing flexion. You got to do it like this. And he said, stop right there. I'm going to have you come up and correct everything I did wrong. And so, long story short, we got done with the weekend, and he said, I'm going to find something for you in this rehab series of ours. And I said, I just dig functional outcomes. This is what I've developed, and I want to expand on it. And he said, all right, let's do a literature search and find out what's out there. And so I kind of gave birth to the QFCE, the quantitative functional capacity evaluation, by finding articles that were published and peer reviewed. And the criteria was to have that level of publication so that they were respected. The subjects that were tested drove normative data that we could compare patients against, and that we could use these tests reliably over time to prove functional improvement and correlate it with the subjective instruments that we all use in our practices. And so I started teaching, instead of maybe 10 or 12 weekends a year, I'm now teaching 2 to 3 weekends a month, flying all over the US and Canada. And then the Prague thing in '95 opened up, and a group of us from LACC went, and that opened up the textbook project. It's just so many doors just kept opening up between the late 80s and early 2000s. I was invited to Australia to present my textbook in 4 different cities around the country, and that was a great experience after the book was published. But just so many wonderful doors.
And then still teaching today.
Can't quit.
So tell us about what you're still teaching, Steve.
Well, the Wisconsin Chiropractic Association asked me to put a course together in the early 90s so chiropractors could legally delegate work to allied staff, to our chiropractic technicians. And so I put together a course on how to take a history, how to take vital signs, how to apply electrodes for electrical stimulation, how to properly use ultrasound, traction. Taught that class from 92 until about 07, and by that time I was getting fried. So we brought in other chiropractors, Wendy Resch, Brenda Holland, and so they're taking over that role for me since then. And then I put a course together for exercise delegation, and that was in the early 2000s. And so I decided that would be what I'll teach, and they can teach the rest. And so I was still teaching impairment rating and flying all over the place to teach the 2nd through the 6th edition of the AMA guidelines that had been published over since 1970 through 2003. So, that was a big job, trying to keep a full practice going, raising 3 kids and having a very tolerant spouse.
So back to exercise delegation, that's a course that obviously chiropractors can attend themselves and also have staff join them, and then staff can be trained and then certified into the delegation of exercise. Have you found it to be very valuable that the chiropractor goes along with staff?
Oh, it's so much better when the entire team is there. Otherwise, each team member doesn't know what the other team member knows. And so over the years, of course, clinics have sent, the same clinics have sent new staff because of, unfortunately, staff turnover, as you know, is a pandemic, if you ask me, because it's so hard to find anybody that will stay for any length of time anymore. So we're constantly retraining staff due to
Sure.
turnover. But yeah, when the quarterback of the clinic is there, the chiropractor, and everybody hears the information together, there is a much better cohesive rehab result success within that clinic that I've
Sure.
seen.
So that's typically covered over 2 weekends, correct?
It's 24 hours now. It used to be 36 hours. And yes, it was in two 12-hour weekends, but starting last year, there was an ask that we put two 12-hour days together so we could minimize the time of learning. And because it's a hands-on class, we kind of get away with it, but it's a significant burn.
So you do knock it out in 1 weekend.
We knock it out in 1 weekend,
All right.
the last 3 times, last
Gotcha.
year and a half. Yeah.
Gotcha. So where does the teacher go to get inspired? Where do you go to get classes and continuing education and after 44 years of practice, keep that moving along?
Oh, it just like I said before, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know, right? So
Right.
um, I would say I love what the Wisconsin Chiropractic Association does. I'm a little prejudiced and maybe biased because I'm on the educational committee. And so I love attending our WCA seminars. I've recently attended several of our functional neurology classes that Mike Powell has taught. He's out of Iowa, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that. And I always liked physical exam, and he's taken it to a level that I just was naive about and didn't understand when I saw ocular movements what they meant. And I have a better understanding of it now. But chiropractor in my exercise class a couple of weeks ago, who was a diplomate in neurology and took all of Mike Powell's 12 classes, I've taken 3, said, Steve, you obviously are excited about this and want to share it, but man, there's so much more to it, and I humbly agreed with him. And so and we were in a class, my partner and I, Mark Ettinger, at the WCA Fall Convention, and we had to team up in Dr. Paul's class. And there's a chiropractor that I hadn't met, a younger woman, and we were workshopping together all the different things that he was asking us to learn. And at the end of the class, she said, I just saw your name tag. Are you the Steve Yeomans? And I said, no, I'm Steve Yeomans,
That's
but
Steve Yeomans. I love it.
it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
It was clear that I was just a good old chiropractor in that room,
Just a good old chiropractor. There you go.
So
So that good old chiropractor has been practicing for 44 years, and you're a little bit ahead of me. I've been practicing for 33, but I've always thought of you, Steve, as cutting edge since day one when I met you, from what I heard about you, and then when I got to know you. And still today, I'm at the WCA convention and I'm rolling through the vendor area, and one of the vendors that has a lot to talk about laser said, you need to talk to Dr. Steve Yeomans about this, and he'll tell you what's going on. So whether it's lower back pain, neck pain, rotator cuff, what's in Steve Yeomans' toolbox today? What are your go-tos? Obviously, you're a chiropractor, and you
sure.
take it from.
So, and I love the term toolbox. I use it a lot. And we have our mitts, I call our hands, the most important part of our toolbox, obviously, for all the many manual therapies that you've mentioned. But for pain management and the acute phase, the cytokine storm I mentioned, briefly about sometimes giving in and recommending somebody get on a Medrol dose pack. I now turn to laser before I do that because it does, I think, a better job, and it's focally attacking the area that's involved rather than systemically negatively affecting so many other systems of the body. So if possible, class 4 laser has, I bought my first one in 2011, and I was very intrigued actually, I bought a class 3B laser in probably the early 90s, when I started teaching a CT delegation class. I worked a lot with Pesco and Poltrowski and his wife Sue. Got my hands on some really good equipment, and class 3B laser did a lot of very good things. And so now the toolbox includes, I should back up a little bit. I also embrace pulsed electromagnetic field, which is another one of those lesser utilized modalities, probably from a cost standpoint. The units are not cheap, and but just like laser, EMF is used in the veterinary world, in the chiropractic world, in the podiatric world, and it uses the magnetic field rather than a focus of light or a light wave to stimulate the mitochondria and release ATP and things like that laser does. So I have two pain modulating modalities that I rely on when needed a lot. I still use electric stim. In fact, my partner this last fall convention took a class on laser on Thursday that recommended IF around the area that you're using class 4 laser on. And we've tried that with several people and had rather significant benefits that we got from just using laser. So that opened up ordering another IF machine to stick in our laser rooms. We wouldn't have to roll the other one down the hallway. The toolbox will never close, but the AK days, my SOT days, I use parts of those of Jim Cox's flexion distraction. I don't have a flexion distraction table. I have a colleague in Green Lake, Colleen Poplin, who's got flexion distraction, and a good friend in Fond du Lac, Dave Langhoff, chiropractors that have flexion distraction, and I know how good it is. It's wonderful. And Robin McKenzie's directional preference. And if a person feels good in a certain position, promoting that position during the treatment is an important part of my initial decision making in the first treatment week. Am I going to promote more flexion, more extension, more lateral flexion? How am I going to pain manage? So getting over the painful hump for many patients is truly still the reason I still love practicing. It's still the biggest challenge, is to get people better naturally without pharmaceutical needs if possible. And it's still tough. I still don't know enough.
The more we know, the more we realize we don't know. You said it great.
Yeah.
So I gotta get you going here, Steve. I know you have patients to see. So I want to wrap up with just two questions. Last one I want to ask is, how can people get more of Steve Yeomans? And I'm sure your website's going to be part of that. But before we do that, we are going to have students listening to this podcast interview. We're going to have young chiropractors. We're going to have chiropractors that have been in practice for 30 years. What's your message? What do young chiropractors and those that are striving to get better need to focus on?
Well, from a practice standpoint, ethics, stay vigilant and professional. Don't get cocky. And invest smartly. Just like the athlete that comes into a world of rich and fame can blow it all in a New York minute, so can any of us. And so it's smart to have a team of helpers. And so whether it's financial advising, you need a good attorney, you need a good accountant, you need a financial guy to keep your head on straight, you need mentors and people to help guide you in your quest to be the best that you can be. And you need to keep it balanced with your family. Again, ethics and I think common respect, all those things, and never become arrogant and think you know enough. That's the day you stop learning. So just forge ahead, realize you'll never know enough. And that's the beauty of this. There's always more doors that you can walk through to learn more things that are just fabulous. We're so lucky to be in this profession. There's nothing that works as well for non-surgical, non-pharmaceutical care of all the healthcare non-surgeons out there. That includes physical therapy is right up there with chiropractic. But when you read the studies, manual manipulation, manual therapies get the best results. And that's our main tool for our toolbox. So always get your hands on people, do what you can, be honest with them. Don't keep them longer than you should. Cooperate with your allies. That means the family practitioner. That means the orthopedist, the physiatrists. You and I have a role, and it's definitely the role of non-surgical conservative care. There are times when people need more. Recognize that. We teach red flags and the cancer, fracture, cut, equina, and infection. You never want to miss those. And that's why you do physical exams. And that's why you develop crap detectors as examiners. So always cooperate, get hospital privileges, get involved with the medical faction in your community. That, besides word of mouth, I get all my referrals from primary care docs because I worked hard at establishing those relationships. Yeah, when you have a patient that comes to you, ask who their PCP is, and then just send them a little summary. They're not going to read 10 pages of an EHR printout. They're going to read a paragraph or two, and just to alert them that you're managing them and wanted them to know. Courtesy goes miles.
There are so many nuggets of awesome information of the 44 years that you've been in practice in what you just said in the last 3 to 5 minutes. And if people want more of Steve Yeomans, I did go to your website. You have a ton of information that not only your patients can learn from, but chiropractors like me can learn from as well. So I'm just going to share that. It's Yeomans-edingerchiropractic.com. Yeomans spelled Yeomans -Edinger, Edinger, chiropractic.com. And I see that you've got a ton of frequently asked questions for patients, which again, as a chiropractor, I enjoyed reading a lot of that. And then you also have your publications that are on there and your textbook. The textbook is the clinical application of outcome assessment, which I did see you can get that on Amazon as well. So that's great. Anything else that's going on in your world, Steve, that you want to share before we wrap up?
Oh, just life is wonderful. I'm a lucky guy. I enjoy being a granddad now, times 4.5. I've got 3 older grandkids that my son brought into the world with his wife, and they're wonderful. We're going to visit 2 of them at UW La Crosse tomorrow, and we've got two new ones, or 1.5 new ones. Our youngest daughter is a new mom, and she's got a 1.5-year-old and due in January with a baby boy that we're looking forward to going through the process again with, and just continue to enjoy everything.
Fantastic. Well, we got to get you off to patients, Steve. So I don't know how I can thank you enough for this time today. You're a fantastic chiropractor, honored with the WCA Chiropractor of the Year back in 1994. You were Lifetime Achievement Award recipient in 2019. Many other awards, accolades. You're a fantastic mentor to so many of us. And I guess I just want to wrap this up by saying thank you, Steve, for the time today and what you continue to do in chiropractic and for chiropractic. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.